Hello, Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to this new series, Sefer Jonah, verse by verse. This series is an exclusive for my patrons on Patreon. I appreciate your support. In this video, we'll be doing the first verse of Jonah, 1:1. Okay, let's get started. So, many a student is daunted when they first sort of move from the world of textbooks into the world of printed Bibles. There are lots of marks on the verse that we are actually not the nikudot, they're not the vowels. So this serves to further complicate the appearance of the verse. So let's go ahead and look. Now these marks, some of them you should recognize as being the standard nikudot that you've learned. Some of these marks, however, should seem not familiar to you. These verses are actually part of the cantillation of the text, and think of them as musical notes for the reciter, the one who reads in the synagogue, the Bakora, whenever these books are recited publicly. They are done in a sing-song fashion. So that is what these marks are here to do, to point out the rise and fall of how the verse flows for the person doing the reading. Okay, so for just a reading for clarity's sake, these marks are not important. However, they are considered to be part of the text, and in certain instances, they will actually be important to the translation of the text. Some of them work as pauses, act as something like a comma in English. So when we come across those verses in which that will be important, we'll point out what those marks are called and what they do. Overall, we call them the trope. These cantillation marks, they're called trope or trup. So anybody who is prepared for a bar mitzvah should be familiar with this. Okay, let's go ahead and read. So this is verse 1, Aleph. It says, Vayihi Devar Hashem El Yonah Ben Amitai Lemor. One more time. Vayihi Devar Hashem El Yonah Ben Amitai Lemor. Okay, quickly let me translate. V'yihi devar Hashem, and the word of Hashem was El Yonah, to Yonah, ben Amitai, son of Amitai, lemor, saying. Okay, so let's go ahead and break this verse down. So first, here's a cleaned up version of this verse. I've removed the trump marks, the cancellation marks, and we're just going to focus on sort of the textbook version of the verse. Okay, so vayihi. What is this? So this is from the shorish haya, and the presentation here should you should be familiar with this to the extent that you can tell that this is a imperfect presentation of this root. Okay, and plus it's got the vav here. So let's go ahead and break that down further. So on the Pa'al binyan, that's the first binyan that people will learn. When I say binyan, I mean it's a conjugation pattern. And this is in the imperfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and fully conjugate haya in the imperfect. Okay, first person singular, ehye. Plural, niye. Second person masculine, singular, tiye. Plural, tiyu. in the second person feminine, ti, and plural, tiena. Okay. Third person masculine, yeah, and the plural, you, and the singular third person feminine, tiye, and plural, tiena. Okay, so as indicated, the word here is yeah. That's what's being used here. So let's go back to our verse and look. So I know what you're saying. It doesn't say yeah, it says vayihi. So let's get on to the next. So we would usually translate it just instantly, by way of explanation, we would usually translate yeah in the imperfect. That is going to be customarily translated in the future tense. So yeah would be translated as it will be or he will be. And that is not how I translated it above. I translated it above as vayihi, and it was. And it was in the past tense. So, incidentally, this Paul imperfect chart can be found in chapter 13 of the first Hebrew primer. That's the textbook that we are going to key this series to. It's the one that I do with my students, that I use with my students most frequently. Perhaps in later versions of this series, if I do updated versions, perhaps we'll key other textbooks in as well. But for now, we're just using the primer. Okay, so the next thing, let's go ahead, vayihi. So again, it doesn't say ye yet, and the vav is there. So this is, I'm sure you have remember, having read the book, having learned a little bit in the book, that vav is called, in the primer, is called a reversing vav. In some textbooks, they call it a vav conversive. In other textbooks, they call it a vav consecutive. And finally, in Hebrew, in the Hebrew sources, they call it a vav ha-hipuch. Vav ha-hipuch, which would mean something like a reversing vav or a flipping vav. Now, what that vav does is it reverses the tense. Reverses the tense of the verb. Okay, so that is a little interesting. It's an interesting feature of biblical Hebrew, this vav ha-hipuch, or the reversing vav as the primer calls it. So vayihi, so yiyeh, it means he will be, it will be, vayihi, and it was, or and he was. Okay, so the rule for the vav ha-hipuch is a vav, pasach, plus an imperfect is going to equal a perfect. Or otherwise stated, a vav plus a future tense verb, what we would customarily call a future tense verb, that is going to be read or understood as a perfect tense verb, or as what we would traditionally call a past tense verb. So vav plus yeh comes out as vayihi. Okay, that can be found in chapter 17 of the first Hebrew primer. Now the spelling changes here due to the fact that the verb haya is in a category that the primer calls clipped verbs, clipped form verbs. So when these verbs are prefixed, this specific category of verbs are prefixed, the last letter drops off. So that's all that's happening here. So all that is explained in chapter 17 of the primer. Okay, let's look at the next section. Vayihi, and it was. So what was? Devar Hashem. Devar Hashem. So in the printed edition here, you see there's a little hyphen. Of course, that would not be in the scroll form of the text. But in the printed editions, they'll frequently have little hyphens in between to indicate that there's a connection between these two words. This unit, Dvar Hashem, is what the primer calls the word pair form. Other textbooks are going to call it the construct state. It's in a construct, or perhaps they'll call it these verbs that have been, these words rather, that have been linked together. They would call that a construct chain. That is, in Hebrew, we call that smichut. Smichut, literally to lean. These are leaning verbs. So when we think about it, the word devar is leaning on Hashem. It's not a contraction per se, but the words sort of are joined together to become one unit. So from now on, devar Hashem, this thing, the word of Hashem, even though there's two words expressing that idea, they become a unit. Something akin to the word boy and the word scout. Separately, they have lives of their own, but once you put them together, Boy Scout, it is its own thing. They become intimately related to each other. Okay, so let's look at the word. So usually the word davar, word, has these nekudot. But when it's in the smichut state, it is almost like a contraction of sound. Whenever one leans into the other, the word is softened. So davar becomes dvar. Here's an example: dvar melech, the word of a king. Okay, that is a unit. So over here it says dvar Hashem, the word of Hashem. The word of Hashem. Okay, so that can be found in chapter 9 of the first Hebrew primer. Let's go further. To Jonah ben Amittai, to Jonah, the son of Amittai. And then our final point of grammar, lemor. Lemor, this is a lamed infinitive form of the root amar, aleph mem resh. Amar means to say. So the lamed infinitive means to say, or as it is frequently used, translated in many translations, saying, lemor, saying. The infinitive, specifically this infinitive, lemor, is covered in chapter 20 of the first Hebrew primer. Okay, so let's put it all together into a translation again. Vayihi devar Hashem, and the word of Hashem was El Jonah ben Amittai, to Jonah, the son of Amittai, lemor, saying. And then the next verse would be a direct quotation of whatever what was contained within this devar Hashem, whatever the exact quotation was of this word of Hashem. Okay, so that was the first verse. I hope that was entertaining. My intention is to do every verse of Jonah in this fashion, go through every point of grammar, point you to where you can find these topics discussed within the primer. If the primer did not do a sufficient job, I will also discuss points here in these videos to sort of fill in any gaps in your education. Also, I will try to show you to use parallel language whenever these grammatical features are called different things by different textbooks. Okay, so that was that. I hope you benefited. I hope to produce these videos at least once a week. Sometimes, some weeks I might produce more than one a week. And we'll do this verse by verse until we finish the book. Okay, I appreciate your support, and I look forward to learning with you. I look forward to seeing you for the next verse. Kol Tuv, Haslach Harava, keep learning.